Hi, Anthony.
Hi, Ira. I'm characteristically quiet today.
We have a mute linguist with us. I'm so glad that you exist. I have to start by thanking two of the producers, Tracy Wheeler and Liz Mazursky, for coming up with this idea. This is, for me, a dream come true. I have been, not just had an interest in language around talking about illness, dying, caregiving, and grieving for years, but it would be more appropriate to say sort of an obsession. And it turns out there's actual scientists and professionals who are interested in this stuff. So it's really a pleasure.
And Ira, it's really the opposite for me, because while I obsess about language all the time, I have been very death averse. It's a topic I've avoided my whole life as much as I can. But in the research I've done for this, I've completely transformed and turned around and embraced the inevitability and the transformation that can attend that last phase of life.
So there is a cure for death aversion, and Anthony has literally become a dying whisperer. It's remarkable. It's a miracle. So let's get serious for a bit. I want to just acknowledge that language, words, are the primal human tool, right? And I want to reflect back on something Peggy McGuire said in just the last hour, and I would say that she touched on what, for me, is the primal question that human beings are asked, which is whether to act out of fear or out of love. In acting out of fear, you kind of constrict, you protect yourself, you flee or you freeze. If you act out of love, you have to be open. You are inherently vulnerable. And so as we talk about different choices of language and whether language kind of, the terms that we use, the metaphors that we use, either constrict what we are thinking about in our conceptual frames, or whether they open us up and expand. Think back that there's also this dialectic between fear and love.
Well, Ira, there's a couple concepts I want to talk about with you. And the first is priming. Priming. So priming is when we hear or are exposed to words or ideas. And those words and language predispose us to feeling or acting or perceiving a certain way later on. The second concept is framing. So a frame is a conceptual framework, and the way that we frame an idea and the words we use activate those frames. And those frames govern how we perceive or believe or act on something. And that has a great deal to do with what the end-of-life experience can be for people.
Do you have examples of that come to mind that resonate?
Sure. If someone who is dying hears others talking in a way that dehumanizes the person or denies what their experience is, they will come to believe that about themselves. It will be more difficult for them to have a transformative experience at the end of life. So if someone is talking about the Alzheimer's in room 3, right, versus Mrs. Robinson in room 3, that's actually going to have an effect on what they believe of themselves. If they believe that they are hearing frames about death, that it's an end, that limits what the possibilities are for them, then that's also going to have a limiting effect on them. If relatives or friends deny how they're feeling or deny the power of transformation, all of that is going to limit the possibilities of transformation in the person who is dying.
Beautiful, beautiful. So this is pernicious. It can be pernicious. The language that constricts us, we've heard it even today, so there's no ill intention here, but just notice the power of language. Every time we say the dying, the sick, we have separated ourselves from our fellows who are going through a stage of life that we will also go through. It would take very few characters more to say the dying people or dying people, sick people. Just that still retains their humanity and changes our frame. I have railed for years against that phrase, good death. We've heard it today, you hear it all the time. But it conflates dying with death. Dying is a part of living. Death is beyond life, right? I don't know anything about death, have frankly never met anybody who convinced me that they knew a lot about death. I know a fair amount about dying because, like so many of you, I've hung out with people who are dying for years. I've asked them to share their perspective with me, right? So instead of the good death, and notice that death there is a noun, I've often used the term dying well. A couple of things just about that. It's more expansive. Dying well is, first of all, it's a gerund. I like gerunds rather than other types of verbs. It's active, right? We're talking about language here. When you hear the phrase dying well, everybody first hears that word well as an adverb. You hear it in the wonderful title of this conference, end well. And it is an adverb. For me, it's more provocative and expansive to hear it as an adjective. Can a person die well within themselves? Can you be well during the period of time that you're dying? Can you end well? So I don't want to take too unfair advantage of you because you can't talk. But a little. Let me just say, to frame this as we go forward, that right now we're kind of seen, the people in this room are seen as part of the death and dying movement. It's true, we are. I'm proud of it. But I think culturally, which is where this conversation really resides, we ought to be a component of the wellness movement. Right? The language would change, right? We'd be talking about the potential for people to die well, to grow individually and together through the end of life, right? That's a much more expansive, inviting subject to engage in. Where not just alleviation of suffering, oh, I hope he doesn't suffer. We all hope he doesn't suffer. But could he grow through the end of life? Could he be well? Could he experience a sense of well-being? Peggy also used the term thriving. Can people thrive during these inherently difficult times of life? I'm not trying to romanticize it. Dying sucks, right? I'm a physician. I was an emergency physician for many years. I hate dying, but it happens. Can we help people to grow through this?
And what you're talking about is drawing on language from a different context, right?
Yeah.
So when we use language that's from an institutional context or a death context, in the context of those who are dying, we are restricting what is possible. So for example, hospice, palliative care. This is language that's only used in institutional contexts. This is language that's only used in the context of dying, right? But if we can draw on normative language, language that people know and are familiar with, why is it a hospice? Why can't it just be a home? Just where they're living. It just happens to be at this stage, at this phase of their life. Why is palliative care? It's only used in the context of bringing care and comfort at the time of death. But why is that? Why can't it just be about quality of life? Why does it have to be about the end of life? If we can root our language and the language we use around death and dying from the language of everyday life and language from living, it'll do a great deal to help provide a more expansive and inviting context for that person to have a transformative and positive experience.
Yes, yes. So some other things that just play off of this. If you want to normalize this and you want to be culturally sensitive and really draw other cultures into this work, we have to be cautious about so many of the common phrases we use. We talk about phrases like at the end of life. Well, when the heck does that start? right? When does end-of-life care start? You know, I have evangelical friends who are very off-put by the work that we do. Not that they don't realize that people, that this life ends, but it's this life that ends, right? They feel like we're going to another life. So they want us to say things like leaving this life or at the end of this life. Many of you know who've read my work, and thank you very much for that, that I frequently, instead of saying at the end of life, I say through the end of life. Because if we're giving the best care possible through the end of life, that starts today. If we're giving the best care possible at the end of life, well, I'm not ready for that, thank you very much. Right? I'm not there yet. Right? Through the end of life starts right now, and I don't know when it ends. It continues on. Right? And let me put in a plug, by the way. I think that our brand is that we give the best care possible through the end of life. Right? You don't have to wait for it. It can start today. And culturally, it's the only thing that I know that every person wants. When you or someone you love is seriously ill, you want the best care possible. It may be a different thing from one person to another, even though they have the same diagnoses, but we all want that.
And the language we use can help to reinforce the possibilities without imposing a sense of an end, right?
Yeah.
So is someone dying with cancer or dying from cancer or living with cancer?
Right.
It doesn't presuppose
That's
and
right.
force an end.
That's right. It's exactly right. Now, some of us in this audience have some sort of Buddhist leanings. I do. And so we're familiar with the concept of like what you expect is often what comes to pass, right? If you think somebody is going to suffer and that their suffering is irremediable, it's kind of likely that that will happen. I see this happening frequently now with people with Alzheimer's disease. We assume that people with Alzheimer's disease will eventually become withdrawn, helpless, notice that phrase, hopeless, and will be ultimately depressed and untouchable. Right? And we create environments, including built environments, architectural environments, but also programs of care that basically predestine them to be as helpless and hopeless as our language and our expectations have predicted. That doesn't have to be the case. If anybody knows about the work of Dr. Bill Thomas, the movie Alive Inside, has anybody seen that movie? Rebecca Mead's brilliant article in the New Yorker from a few years ago, The Sense of an Ending. Alzheimer's disease is not hopeless. We may not be able to cure it in any time soon, but people with Alzheimer's disease, many more than we might expect, may retain a capacity for well-being, for joy. Yes. Now that's culturally, this ought to be the next big thing in American culture. That you can be well during the time that you are dying. This is really groundbreaking, and we can carry that forward. But the language that we use, the aphorisms, I know you want to talk about aphorisms and the metaphors, this is all fundamental to this traumatic, transformative cultural change that's available to us.
Well, and we may want to take a look at Alzheimer's disease to start. And maybe start calling it a late life learning disability.
Yeah.
It completely reframes what it is, right?
Yeah.
People will feel differently and treat people differently if they see that person as having a late life learning disability.
Yes. Yes. If you talk about dignity as being inherent, worth as being inherent, that automatically changes your relationship to the person. They are inherently worthy, inherently dignified, and now how can we, care for them in ways that honor and celebrate, right? Honor and celebrate. Honoring and celebrating, I like gerunds, people through the end of life, waking them out of life, to use the Irish term. This is there's one other concept I want to get in here. There's a certain healthy defiance toward mortality. We're all going to die. Right? We've got to get over that. But we can be defiantly joyful and full of loving and life. The quote that Alexandra used from Breath Becomes Air of Lucy and Paul deciding to have a child. For me, that was a healthy defiance, a defiant act that, even the force majeure cannot take this from us. Thank you for that. It's just culture changing, dramatic. Aphorisms?
Yeah, so let's talk about what language people believe, okay? Because to have something that's repeated and to have something planted is something that is going to have an influence. Now, it is true that people believe and abide language more if it is poetic and if it is familiar. And that's why aphorisms use rhyme, alliteration, assonance. And that if it sounds good, we are more inclined to believe that it's true. So when we hear expressions and aphorisms and proverbs, if they are poetic and if they're familiar to us, they're going to have a profound effect on what that person believes of themselves and what is possible, right? And if you say the same idea expressed beautifully or expressed without any kind of poetry, one is going to influence and be more believable than the other one. So are the aphorisms, the expressions that are used, are they going to contribute to a sense of transformation and hope and respect and belief in the power of change? Or are they going to shut the person down and believe that they're limited because they've heard something that confines what is possible? So what are some aphorisms you're familiar with?
So I have two that I wanted to bring to the attention of this group. First is forgive and forget. This is ridiculous, right? This is absolutely absurd. I hear it all the time, right? Forgiving is a sophisticated emotional strategy for getting rid of the emotional baggage that you carry, right? But it requires remembering. Forgetting is amnesia, right? If I don't remember you harming me or you doing me wrong, what's there to forgive, right? I have to remember to forgive. And again, forgiving is about my well-being, about all of our individual well-being, not fundamentally first and foremost about the other person. It may involve the other person, but it's first and foremost about us. So there's one, but it's common. The other one in our field that I've been sort of calling attention to for quite a while is this notion of people die as they have lived. Well, they might pull that off. They might not change, but the fact that you're seriously ill and you know that things are coming to an end and you're going to lose all that you love and all the people that you love, that's true. Oh, man. And so often that is a catalyst for remarkable human development, for people to change, for people to grow, for people say they feel intensely alive and they do things, they say things that they hadn't done before, right? So, in fact, many people change in profound ways that are important to them and to the people they love during the months, weeks, days, sometimes moments before they die. And if we believe that he's going to die as he lived, that sets up a potential for therapeutic nihilism. Like, why bother? What about this life review? Who cares? Let him, right? And just let's end it as quickly, as painlessly as possible. There's no opportunity there, but no, people can change.
These low expectations are a tyrant, and they imprison people to a certain fate that doesn't have to be that way.
Right, right. I could keep going. Things always turn out okay. They do not. That's absurd. I mean, that's disrespectful, right? Things will work out in the end. They may not. Stop saying that. We can hope for it, but be cautious about your language.
I want to talk a bit about metaphor. Metaphor is an important part of a transformative experience something that goes beyond expressing what we would normally be able to express. People who are at that phase of life, they can speak in nonsense and they speak in metaphor, because metaphor is capable of transmitting and capturing dimensions of understanding and nuance that just plain old descriptive language cannot. And so metaphor can be a powerful and helpful way to connect with people who are at the end of life experience. People who are speaking metaphors, we shouldn't deny that that's happening. Better to embrace it, lean into it, and ask the person to talk further about that, because it may be the only way that language could possibly transmit the profundity of this experience that they're having.
Absolutely. Boy, we need more of you. So, I want to come back, if we can, to this notion of connecting ourselves to the notion of wellness and well-being. Right? This is very powerful. It's a powerful stream in our culture, right? As we gradually are growing the rest of the way up as a culture, acknowledging finally that we're mortal, that we're going to die, right? Get over it. And let's get on with living as fully, as defiantly, as joyfully as possible. Here's my dad and my, at the time, just a few-month-old daughter, Leela. Dad at this time was living with pancreatic cancer. He knew he was dying. He loved children more than anything in the world. Oh, it's not up there. Okay, they're teeing it up. I'm going to show you my picture of my dad, and he's here in front of me. There he is. So I want to talk to you about what wellness is as people are approaching the very end of life. You know, Freud was once asked about what's mental health, Dr. Freud, and he said it's the ability to love and to work. It was kind of a toss-off comment. Right?
Leben und arbeiten.
Yes, thank you. What he whispered. And I've thought about this for a long time. I think it was brilliant, to love and to work. But what I would have, by the way, added to laugh. If you can love, you can work, laugh, boy, you're probably pretty healthy emotionally at a basis. You may have bad days and all that, but how about when you can no longer work? My dad couldn't work here. How about because of frailty of age or illness? You're beyond that. For me, and I've thought a lot about this, well-being is the ability to love, to feel loved, and to have the capacity to feel joy. Here's my dad, who hated the idea that he was dying, looking at his first granddaughter, and he's ecstatic. He's sad during this time. This was awful. But he's ecstatic. They are connected to one another in a way that is mutually joyful. I sat with my dad during the last days of his life. Had the privilege of caring for him through the end of his life. My dad was well during the time that we consider him dying. He died well, not just in the process of it, but well within himself. I think this is our great cultural opportunity to shift the way we think about human beings, human caring, well-being through the very end of life. I hope we get to work together, because this work is so fundamental. We're down at the very essence of what makes us human. It's not just our opposable thumbs or our 46 chromosomes. It is the ability of language and our ability to care well for one another.
And the language we use can have a profound effect on what that last phase of life is, that transformation.
So let's act out of love, not out of fear. Let's expand rather than constrict the potential for human beings through the very end of life. Thank you all for the work that you do and for joining us today for this wonderful conversation. Thank you.